Every city she approached sent out its tribute before she arrived. Not because they had heard she was coming with an army, because they had heard what she did to the cities that made her army fight its way in. Her name was Amina, Queen of Zazzau, ruler of the Hausa kingdom that controlled the most important trade routes in West Africa. For 30 years, from approximately 1576 to 1610, she led her army personally into battle. She won every time. She expanded her kingdom's territory further than any ruler before her. She fortified every city she conquered with walls that her people called ganuwar. Amina's walls that still stand in some places today. She refused to marry. She took lovers from each conquered territory one night, then released them, so no man could ever claim power over her through marriage. History has given you Cleopatra. It has given you Isabella. It has given you Elizabeth. It has not given you Amina. Not because she was less extraordinary, but because the world that wrote history was not paying attention to West Africa. We are. To understand Amina, you first need to understand the world she was born into, because the Hausa kingdoms of 16th century Nigeria were not what the history textbooks that ignored them would have you imagine. Kano in the 16th century was one of the great cities of Africa. Its leather goods traveled north across the Sahara to markets in Tripoli, Tunis, and Cairo. Its textiles were traded south to the forest kingdoms of what is now southern Nigeria. Its market attracted merchants from across the continent and from the Arab world. The Hausa kingdoms sat at the intersection of the trans-Saharan trade. Gold came north from the forest kingdoms. Salt came south from the Saharan mines. Leather, textiles, cola nuts, and slaves moved in every direction. The kingdom that controlled the southern gateway, the access point between the forest zone and the Hausa commercial centers, was Zazzau. Zazzau had a tradition that distinguished it from many kingdoms of the medieval world. The women of the royal house held real political positions, not symbolic ones, not ceremonial ones. The Magajia, the queen mother or senior royal woman, had formal authority within the Zazzau political system. Amina was born into a royal house that had produced female rulers before her mother, Turunku. In some traditions, the ruler of Zazzau herself raised a daughter who watched the court from childhood and drew specific conclusions about what a ruler needed to be. Those conclusions were not about ceremony. They were about cavalry. The Kano Chronicle, one of the primary sources for Amina's life, describes her childhood in specific terms. Even as a girl, she was drawn to war. Not to violence as an end in itself. To what war required. Strength, discipline, tactical intelligence. The ability to command and to be obeyed. The Hausa military tradition was built on cavalry. The horses of the savannah, bred for endurance in the heat and dust. Ridden by armored warriors, carrying iron weapons. Cavalry that could move faster than any force in the region, strike from unexpected directions, and exploit tactical opportunities with a speed that infantry couldn't match. She was, by every account, a woman who attracted suitors. The oral traditions describe men of wealth and power seeking her hand. She refused them all. Not out of indifference, out of calculation. Because Amina had looked at the political landscape of the Hausa kingdoms and understood something that most rulers of her time, male or female, missed. The moment she married, her husband would become the power. In Hausa political tradition, as in most 16th century political traditions, a married woman's authority was filtered through her husband's. Marriage was not a partnership. It was a transfer. So she chose differently. She trained. She studied. She built relationships with the warriors who would become her army. And when her brother Karama became ruler of Zazzau and began relying on her military judgment, she began the career that would make her the most feared ruler in the Hausa world. According to the Kano Chronicle, she had already led her first military expedition within 3 months of her brother's accession. 3 months. She was not waiting for permission. She was not waiting for someone to tell her the time was right. She had been ready for years. Amina's wars were not wars of destruction. This is the detail that most accounts miss when they describe her as a warrior queen, which turns the emphasis entirely wrong. She was a warrior queen, but the wars were in service of something more sophisticated than conquest for its own sake. Every kingdom she defeated became a tributary of Zazzau, not a colony, not an occupied territory. A tributary, paying cola nuts, or cloth, or horses, or soldiers to Zazzau's army, in exchange for the specific benefit of not being attacked again. This was not simple extraction. It was a commercial network, built on military credibility. And then there were the walls. Every city she took, she fortified. Earthen walls, sometimes miles long, surrounding the settlements that fell under Zazzau's authority. The walls were not just defense. They were a statement. Zazzau is here. Zazzau is permanent. The arrangement we have established is not temporary. The new kingdom to the south was not a minor chieftaincy. It was a sophisticated state, with its own military tradition, its own cavalry, its own territorial ambitions. Amina fought it, and made it tributary. The territories she absorbed to the east bordered the sphere of influence of the Canaan-Bornu Empire, one of the most powerful states in the entire Lake Chad basin. She was fighting serious opponents, experienced, motivated, capable, and for 30 years. The Kano Chronicle does not record a single defeat. Not one. The oral traditions preserve another detail about Amina's campaigns. After each victory, she would take a man from the conquered territory as her companion for a single night. In the morning, he was released with gifts, without claims. She denied every man, no matter his status, his wealth, his desire to become the consort of the most powerful ruler in the region, the permanence that would have given him leverage over her. Not cruelty. Political architecture. She was building an empire that answered to one person, and she was ensuring it stayed that way. By the peak of Amina's reign, approximately 1600 AD, Zazzau was the dominant power in the central Hausa world. Its trade network extended from the cola-producing forest kingdoms of the south to the Saharan trade routes of the north. Its military reputation was such that kingdoms sent tribute without being asked, because the alternative was making Amina's army ask in person. The traditions attribute specific innovations to her. The introduction of metal armor, chain mail and iron protection to warriors who had previously relied on leather and quilted fabric. The systematic cultivation of cola nuts as a commercial crop within Zazzau, turning a traded commodity into a produced one. capturing more of the value chain for her own kingdom and the tributary network, the specific political architecture of her empire that allowed Zazzau to exercise imperial authority across a vast territory without the administrative apparatus that most empires required. Amina ruled at the same moment as Elizabeth I of England, at the same moment as Suleiman the Magnificent's successors in Istanbul, at the same moment as Akbar the Great in India, all of them building empires, all of them navigating the specific challenges of ruling large territories with limited communication. Amina's solution, the tributary wall system, the military deterrence model, was as sophisticated as any of theirs. And you have heard of all of those rulers. You had not heard of her until now. Amina died on campaign. The Kano Chronicle, in the specific, matter-of-fact style of a court record, notes her death without elaborating. She died in the field. After 34 years of campaigning. After a lifetime of refusing every form of permanent attachment that might have made her vulnerable. She died the way she had lived. Moving forward. She was approximately 60 years old. She had led her army personally into battle for 3 decades. She had never lost. And here is the structural vulnerability that Amina's specific political architecture could not survive her. Her empire was built on her, not on institutions, not on a codified system that could function independently of its architect, on the reputation of a specific person who had never lost a battle and who was now gone. The tributary kingdoms reconsidered. Not immediately, not all at once, but the calculation that had made tribute paying rational, the certainty that non-payment would bring Amina's army to your gates, was no longer operative, and tributary relationships that rest entirely on fear do not survive the removal of the source of fear. 2 centuries after Amina's death, the Fulani jihads of the early 19th century transformed the entire political landscape of what is now northern Nigeria. The Hausa kingdoms, Zazzau included, were absorbed into the Sokoto Caliphate. The specific political tradition that had produced Amina, the Hausa system with its female royal officials, its Magagia tradition, its space for women in political authority, was modified, reshaped, and in some dimensions constrained by the new Islamic political order. The warrior queen who had dominated the central Hausa world for 30 years became a legend, preserved in oral tradition, referenced in the Kano Chronicle, celebrated in local memory, and almost entirely unknown to the world outside West Africa. Here is the specific reason. You have never heard of Amina. Not that she was unimportant. Not that the record doesn't exist. But that the records that existed, the Kano Chronicle, the oral traditions, the physical evidence of her walls, were evaluated by people who had specific reasons to be skeptical of what they contained. British colonial administrators and scholars who wrote the first academic histories of northern Nigeria in the early 20th century encountered the traditions of Amina and largely dismissed them. Not because the evidence was absent. The Kano Chronicle is a written source, not merely oral tradition. The walls are physical evidence. But because the picture the evidence painted, a woman who had commanded armies, expanded an empire, and refused to marry, did not fit the picture that colonial scholarship had decided African history looked like. The recovery of Amina's history is the work of African scholars, Nigerian historians who took the Kano Chronicle seriously? Who documented the oral traditions before they were lost? Who argued against the dismissals of colonial scholarship that what the evidence showed was real? In Nigeria, Amina is not forgotten. There is a statue of her in Lagos. Her name is on streets, schools, and institutions. She appears on the Nigerian National Historical Monuments. She is, in Nigerian historical memory, one of the defining figures of the country's pre-colonial past. The forgetting is not universal. It is specific. It is the forgetting of the world outside Africa that decided African history was not worth learning. That decision, made over centuries of colonial education, is the reason you are learning about her from a YouTube channel rather than from the school you attended for 12 years. The history of the world, as most of the world was taught it, is the history of specific places, specific traditions, specific kinds of record keeping. Amina's walls are still there. Not all of them. Not most of them. But some. Earthen fortifications that have survived 500 years of rain and sun, and the slow reclamation of the savannah. Still visible, still documented, still physical proof of a woman who built an empire and left her mark on the literal landscape. The land remembers, even when the history books don't. And the people remembered. The oral traditions, passed from generation to generation by the keepers of memory, preserved what the written records of the colonial period tried to overlook. A woman, an army, 30 years, not one defeat. Here is what Amina's story teaches us. Not just about Amina, about history itself. History is not simply what happened. It is what the people with access to the means of recording and transmitting knowledge decided to preserve. For 2 centuries, those people were largely not African, and the specific decisions they made about what counted as reliable evidence, about what kinds of political achievement were credible in African contexts, about who got to be treated as a historical figure rather than a legend. Those decisions shaped what the world learned and what it didn't. The statue of Amina in Lagos shows her in armor, on horseback, spear raised. Not the image of a decorative queen, the image of a commander, because that is what she was. That is what Nigerians know she was. That is what the evidence shows she was. The world that was taught history without Amina in it was taught an incomplete world. Not a world where women didn't lead armies. Not a world where Africa didn't produce warrior queens. Not a world where military genius was the exclusive property of the civilizations that happened to write the textbooks. Just a world where the people who wrote the textbooks had decided whose history mattered. Amina led her army for 30 years. She built walls that still stand. She created an empire that the region did not see again for 2 centuries. And she did it while refusing to be anyone's wife. History tried to forget her. The walls disagreed. The land disagrees. And now, so do we.